Mark, is there a reason that thing?
I haven't calibrated it yet.
Okay, I'd like to call to order a special town board meeting for January of 2016. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Boys, do you have the notice? Do you have the notice?
Special meeting to be held on January 25th at 6 p.m. at the Shandaken Town Hall to hear Milone and MacBroome's findings and suggestions for the map Tremper Phoenicia area for the local flood analysis. How's that? Is that good? I wrote enough on Facebook, I should know.
Yeah, so it's really not a formal meeting tonight, folks. Basically, it's for the town board to hear the findings of MMI and Milone and MacBroome. They've been working since, I believe, we started in November or October of 2014, somewhere about there, towards this plan to see what would be feasible, what would be available to us, and options. So, with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mark Carabetta from Milone and MacBroome Incorporated, and I'll take my seat here.
All right, just give me a few minutes to get set up here with the projector screen. I might need your help with the advanced thing too. For some reason that remote's not working. But let's at least get the screen. People would see better. I could set it up on the table. You know, the whole screen up on the table. Oh yeah.
You're missing the left side of that.
Yeah, I'm not sure why it's a little bit. Don't count yourself out yet. All right. No, I think we're good. I think we got the amendment thing working. All right. Well, thanks for coming, everyone. I ran through these results earlier in the fall 2 separate presentations, one in Phoenicia and then one in Mount Tremper. So I'd like some input on how much detail I should go into. I mean, if I go through everything in detail, combining both those talks, it could take a couple hours here. You probably have other things to do after this. So, but I'll start going along, and maybe partway through I could check in. Maybe we could skip over some of the details as we go along. So what we're going to talk about tonight, we're going to do a recap of why we were doing a local flood analysis in Phoenicia and Mount Tremper, and what it involves. And then explain what types of flood mitigation options we examined in Phoenicia and Mount Tremper. Look at some of our hydraulic modeling results, look at the results of the benefit cost analysis, and then go through the recommendations that we made in the report, and talk about the next steps. So just to go back over the dates, as Rob hit on, we started this right here in September of 2014, and I explained to the town board the process that we were going to go through. And then we had separate meetings, one in Phoenicia and Mount Tremper, and I know I saw some of you there. We gathered input on where flooding occurred, what sort of damages occurred, collected lots of information. We had large-scale maps spread out at that time. There were several of us here from our firm, and that information was very helpful and went into the reports. You know what I forgot about? I've got hard copies that I meant to give to the board members. Just maybe I can hand these to you, Rob. There's 5 copies here for the board members. They don't include the appendices, and I figured we'll get those to you later after we go through tonight's material. Then we came back in August of 2015 and covered the results. First in Phoenicia, then in Mount Tremper. And now here we are tonight to present the final findings. So what is an LFA, or a local flood analysis? It's an engineering analysis. It's scientifically based. We begin by developing flood mitigation alternatives, and then we evaluate them using hydraulic modeling. It's a hydraulic modeling software that we use, an Army Corps of Engineers hydraulic modeling called HECRAS. We use that combined with lots of other engineering approaches to evaluate whether a flood mitigation idea is going to work or not, and if it is, how well it's going to work. How much will it reduce flooding on Main Street in Phoenicia, or down in the hamlet of Mount Tremper? And then if we have a handful of alternatives that are feasible and that do reduce flooding, we look at the benefit cost analysis. How much does it cost to implement this alternative versus how much flood reduction are we going to see, and how much monetary value is there in that flood reduction? Once we've identified those and have a better understanding of which ideas are viable and which aren't, we could look at which ones could be funded and from what sources. And it gives us a blueprint not just for immediate flood reduction, because not all of these alternatives could be implemented right away. It's also a long-term blueprint for the town to use. We worked very closely with SAFARI, which is the Shandaken Area Flood Assessment and Remediation Initiative, which includes the town, town staff members, Rob and some of the board members, Shandaken residents and business owners, the Ashokan Watershed Stream Management Program, which consists of the organizations and agencies that you see listed there, Ulster County Department of Environment, and several of our staff from Milone and MacBroome. And there's 2 study areas. One is Phoenicia. The area is marked by the black lines here, so Esopus Creek, from right around Woodland Valley Bridge, going downstream. The downstream end is just off the map here. And then going up Stony Clove as well. And you see the measurements on here along Esopus Creek and Stony Clove. And this is a Google Earth image of the hamlet of Phoenicia, and I'll just put up the some of the FEMA zones on here just to set some context. This is the 100-year floodplain, and this is a preliminary map. I know it was modified a little bit before it was finalized, and we'll have the final version in our final report. But this gives you an idea based on FEMA mapping. This is the area that would be inundated in a 100-year flood. 100-year flood means each year it has a 1 in 100 chance of happening. And there are restrictions on developing in these areas. You have to be elevated 2 feet above the base flood elevation if you're building in this 100-year area. And then the darker green is the floodway, and that's an area within the 100-year floodplain that's identified by FEMA. That's the area of the swiftest flows, and really no development at all is recommended in these areas. And in Phoenicia, we do have some buildings located within the floodway. There's some along here along Station Road that are within the floodway, and this is the area of deepest and swiftest flooding and where most damage is likely to occur in the event of a flood. And the second study area as we go downstream is Mount Tremper. And again, I've got the lines on here showing along Esopus Creek and then up the Beaver Kill, the study area. And we've got the same sort of overlay here in Mount Tremper. We have the 100-year special flood hazard area. You can see it really widens out here through Mount Tremper. It really includes this whole neighborhood in here is all within the 100-year floodplain. And then the floodway is quite wide here. And you see this area here. All these buildings, Risley Road, are all within the FEMA floodway. Now when we start out doing our hydraulic modeling, we start by calibrating the model. So we run the model and then we compare it. These are flood photos that we're taking during the Irene flood. And then using our model, if our model is a little bit off in one place, putting in the Irene flows, we could calibrate it a bit and make sure it matches up. And this is just one example. We have many marked up images like this, just trying to get it to match and to calibrate our model. And if you'll bear with me for 1 second, I'm just going to change programs here. And I just want to run a little movie. It's a two-dimensional model that we used within the hamlet of Phoenicia. This is an existing conditions run of the flows that we saw during Irene. And you can see it sort of inundate the hamlet and then subside. And I've got to switch programs, so it'll just take me 1 second, but if you bear with me, I think you'll find it interesting to see. So now what we see here is, this is Phoenicia. The red line is that preliminary 100-year floodplain. And what I'm going to show is the shades of blue represent water depths, with the darker blue being deeper water and the lighter blue being more shallow water. And I'm just going to run a little, and this is starting on the night of August 27th, 2011 at about at 9 p.m. I'm just going to let this run here, and this is just going through the clip, and it'll take you through August 28th. You see the water starting to inundate there. See it running down Main Street and then subside. take that back. So with this, we could really begin to see the patterns of the way the water inundated the hamlet, and then we're able to try different alternatives, such as widening the channel or creating floodplain or deepening the channel, and see how it influences the flooding. I'm going to do one other run here. So instead of water depth on this one will show you water velocity. So now the red color is the higher velocities, and the blue color being lower velocities. And you can see as the storm starts, you start to see velocities developing right down Main Street. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to the presentation, but I really wanted to show you, just give you an idea of how the modeling works and how we're able to use it to evaluate flood mitigation options. So these are the alternatives that we evaluated in Phoenicia. One thing that we do is we look at bridges, because often bridges act as constrictions, and water piles up behind them and creates flooding. So we looked at each bridge and asked whether it was causing or contributing to flooding. We started with the Woodland Valley Bridge. We looked at Bridge Street Bridge. We looked at enhancement of the floodplain through the hamlet, and I'll explain more what I mean by that. We looked at removal of accumulated gravel bars in the channel. We looked at dredging the channel, and then going up Stony Clove, we looked at the Main Street Bridge modifications and enhancement of the floodplain. Looking at Woodland Valley Bridge, you can see here, we noticed there was a bit of a, so the water's flowing this way. The Woodland Valley Bridge during a flood, it kind of bulges out here. You can see that the bridge is acting as a constriction. And when we evaluated it, this is looking at it in cross-section in the model. So now the water's flowing this way. You're looking at the channel from the side, and this is the bridge. And you can see here, if we were to remove the bridge from the model and replace it with a larger bridge, it would actually create about almost a 5-foot reduction in flooding here during the 100-year flood right at the bridge. And that reduction extends about 750 feet upstream. But when you go back to this illustration, if we look at the reduction in flooding, it sounds great, almost 5 feet. It's causing some inundation of the road here. By replacing that bridge with a larger structure, you will get some reduction of flooding in the road less frequently, but the bridge isn't causing the flooding of any houses or structures. So we did not recommend replacement of the bridge, but we did recommend, if it comes due for replacement, a larger bridge ought to be considered that does not constrict flows or back up water. But in and of itself, we don't recommend replacing that bridge because it's not contributing to the flooding of any homes, just periodic flooding of the road. We looked at Bridge Street. The bridge is in poor condition. It's prone to debris jams. We know it overtopped in Irene, and it's been damaged a number of times. It's a fairly low-profile bridge. We also know from our conversations with the town and with Safari that it's pretty important a bridge to have traffic flow through town. They want to see having multiple routes to go through town, not having the town be sort of a dead end. So we knew we didn't want to just remove the bridge. We wanted to maintain it. So we looked at what a larger bridge would do, or by removing the Bridge Street Bridge from the model and looking at larger bridges, what sort of benefit would that have? And we found that there was a reduction in water surface elevations at that bridge by about 3 feet right at the bridge. Because the channel is fairly steep in there and the bridge has a low profile and overtops, it actually doesn't provide much benefit in the hamlet itself. You have a 3-foot reduction in water surface elevations at the bridge, but as you go upstream about 350 feet, it drops to a foot and it decreases going upstream. So the actual flood reductions, if we were to replace that bridge with a bigger one, would be minimal. So we didn't roll that out, but we wanted to try it out in the modeling in combination with other scenarios, which I'll get into a bit later. Now the next thing we evaluated was floodplain enhancement. And before I get into the specifics of what we modeled there, I want to just do this little illustration so you can see what it is I'm trying to describe here. This is basically the channel as we see it now. It's just almost a cartoon version here. As you come through Phoenicia, we have the water in the channel under normal flows. You have some homes on both sides. And when the flooding comes up, we have water on both sides and homes and businesses being flooded. And then the water resides. Now, what we propose here with this alternative is to excavate and create a larger floodplain by actually lowering the elevation of the floodplain on both sides, or one side or both sides of the channel. That area is not wet all the time. It's wet during a flood. Under normal flows, the flow is in the channel. These areas are dry. They can be used for recreational purposes, for walking. They're usually grass. But during a flood, they get inundated, and you wouldn't have any houses there. Now you see, if I go back to the way it was, we have a house here and 2 houses. Under this scenario, that house is gone. That house has been relocated. And you have these 2 houses over here, and during a flood, there's more room for the water to be conveyed through the hamlet. It was at the expense of this home here. It's been relocated, but now these 2 homes are dry, and under the previous existing condition, they were flooded. So that's the sort of scenario we modeled, and it looks like this. Here's Stony Clove coming in, and Esopus Creek coming downstream. Here's the Bridge Street Bridge. This area shown in red is we modeled that area as being excavated down. Basically the elevation of the floodplain being lowered, so more water could be conveyed down the channel in a flood. Now the red dots are on parcels where the structures on those parcels would need to be relocated in order to be able to construct that scenario. The ones in yellow are parcels that would be impacted by the excavation of the floodplain, but the structure itself wouldn't be impacted. This one's a bit of a question mark. It's a bit close to the structure. It's not clear whether that structure would need to go or stay there. So it's about 2,100 linear feet in length. Would require some relocation of structures near Station Road. The building right here next to Bridge Street, the real estate building, it's sort of a double building. And then the campground here would be impacted by this. And when we look at it in our modeling, that's the existing conditions in a 10-year flood. And when we look at it, if this floodplain were to be constructed, it doesn't eliminate flooding entirely, but it reduces it. You see in certain areas along Main Street, there's a range of flood reductions. It ranges from very little to up to a foot. And then down in this area, over a foot, and less as you go upstream. Then we look at the Irene flood, and we look at the reductions if this were to be constructed. And again, they range. But generally along Main Street, as you go from the upstream to downstream end, they increase, but around up to a foot or just over a foot. So as I say, it reduces but does not eliminate flooding in Phoenicia. We see reduction in water surface elevations of up to 1.2 feet on Main Street during an Irene type of flood. It would require the relocation of homes and businesses. And because we're constructing floodplain on both sides, it would require a larger Bridge Street bridge to span that width and to convey those flows. So this is one idea. We saw a reduction in flood surface, flood inundations, and we're going to advance this to the benefit cost analysis so we can weigh how much it costs versus how much benefit there is. Another alternative we looked at was removal of accumulated sediment bars. And it's a comment we heard a lot during the initial public meetings that we have to get the sediment out of the channel. We paddled the channel in a canoe and noted where some of these larger sediment bars were as we went down. And this is an example of some of the areas where we modeled removal of these gravel bars. You know, basically through this whole reach going right through the hamlet, and then other areas we saw lots of aggregation of sediments down by Sleepy Hollow Campground, where sediment really seemed to be accumulated in the channel. And this is a lot of numbers, but it's basically, these are the cross sections and the different reductions we see in water surface elevations when we pull those gravel bars out. And we see some pretty good reductions during a bankful event, and that's a flood that occurs almost every year, maybe once every year and a half. And we see it at certain locations, you know, you can see up to a foot, whereas in other areas there's no reduction at all. So it's very variable as you pull these gravel bars out. But as the floods get bigger and you get a more infrequent floods, you see almost no benefit in the larger floods, because now the flood is filling up the floodplain and taking up much more space as it goes downstream. And a little bit of sediment being removed from the channel isn't going to make any difference. So I've summarized the results there for skimming some sediment bars. But what we wanted to look at is something more aggressive, a more aggressive removal of sediment from the channel to see if this has any benefit on flooding. And what we did basically through the hamlet from upstream of the Route 28 bridge here going downstream, you could see the aggregation of sediment through here. And then down to about this line, we dredged the channel here by about 3 feet in the model. This is from upstream of Route 28 to downstream of the Bridge Street Bridge by a depth of 3 feet, maintaining 2-to-1 side slopes, so we weren't over-steeping the slopes by too much. Now when you calculate the volume of material we'd be pulling out under that scenario, it's over 11,000 cubic yards, and at 18 cubic yards a truckful, that's about 627 truckloads over a distance of 986 linear feet through the channel. And this is what it looks like. This is a cross section of the channel. That sort of pink line here is the way the channel was, and this black line shows that's what we modeled. We basically squared it off and removed all this material. And that's where I got that volume from, is by adding all that material. What we found was it reduces flooding under moderate flows, the bankful, and even up to the 10-year flood. It's up at certain locations. There's about a 1.5-foot reduction in the 10-year flood, which is just downstream of the Route 68 bridge. And you can see if I go back up here, 168. That's right about in this location. We're seeing some real reduction in flooding. It causes